Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon again. We're going to get started with a more, I guess, formal part of this. So if you want to grab a drink really quickly or some munchies really quickly, this would be the time to do it. So thank you all for coming here today. We really weren't sure how many people would get the message and get the word out, and we're so thankful that you're all here. And we want to also say hello to those who are streaming this live, because there were some people who weren't able to come. And so we are having that streamed live today, and then it would also be available to look at later as a recorded piece if you want to listen to it or look at it again later or share it with someone else who wasn't able to come. So my name is Sandra Lee. Today we gather as the family and friends of Sandy Wood. It is good that we are together to celebrate the life of our dear and remarkable Sandy, wife, aunt, colleague, mentor, teacher, artist, actress, friend, and so much more to all of those who love her. There are several of us who are going to speak today about our engagement with Sandy in various aspects of her colorful and creative life. But as you have been doing, these next couple hours are also here for us all to speak together and share our memories and our treasured memories and moments with Sandy. There are inevitably the tears of a little bit of grief, but mostly, I think even more, there should be laughter and joy that we were part of her circle, that she touched each of us in small and profound ways, and that even through her last week, she found ways to express her whimsy, her humor, her unique slant on life, always finding the wry essence of experience. I've tried to write this talk many times over the last 2 weeks. Bottom line, I didn't want to face the reason for this talk. What I needed and wanted was to talk about it with Sandy. Early this morning, as I fought with my computer and printer over technical glitches with the program, I took a breath and gazed out on the green of the neighborhood lawns, the fall colors seeping into the trees and shrubs, the harvest moon melting to morning sun. I was up early. First, 2 young deer passed by, then several birds hopped on the lawn, and then our resident resplendent fox trotted up the driveway. All moments Sandy would have captured in a quick sketch with humorous captions. She was sitting on my shoulder, and well, here we go. I first met Sandy and Bob when I was 15 years old at Dutch Country Playhouse. Smitten with the theater when I saw my first Shirley Temple movie at age 2, and having done a few things in school and community, finally, a play with teenage girls with real stuff to sink your teeth into. Playing in the Crucible was life-changing for me, not least of which was sharing looks on stage with Bob when our Judge Danforth couldn't remember his lines ever, which was constantly, even with a script on his desk, and me knowing all of his lines ready to whisper to him. Our favorite ad-lib when he was forced to walk away from me and the desk for a few minutes, and for the past 52 years, Bob and I have been laughing over his ad-lib, "Mr. Proctor, are you putting me on?" Thankfully, my back was to the audience, and Bob, as Mr. Cheever, had the large notebook in which, as the court reporter, he was recording the trial, and he hid behind it. Both our shoulders were shaking. I didn't have any scenes with Sandy as Tituba, but she was already a legend at DCP with her performances in She Stoops to Conquer, Queen Catharine in The Lion in Winter, and Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Frankly, I was in awe. But she was also designing costumes and posters and such, and one evening she brought me the poppet, or the doll, she had made, a crucial prop in the show and for my character, Mary Warren. She quietly handed it to me, and my awe turned to respect, to love, as we talked about the show. She became one of the first adults I could call by her first name. We all know that, right? It was Dr. Krause and Mrs. Bishop and so forth, but she was Sandy. I still have that poppet stored in a safe place in my attic, so safe I couldn't find it for today. Yes, Sandy would laugh with all of us. So began a half-century of Sandy being my mentor, teacher, older sister, half-mother, confidant, and friend. Throughout the rest of my high school years and even into some summers through college, I had the joy of being in shows with Sandy. She was an amazing actress, Audiences loved her in musical comedy, drama, fairy tales. It didn't matter. She had it. That indescribable something that is talent, charisma, empathy, imagination, and something else that just simply sparkles on the stage. She was born to be on center stage in a light. Her family were entertainers, acrobats, dancers. It was in her blood, and she found ways to create theater all of her life. From the Crucible, we segue to Pumpernickel Players, produced and directed by Harold Boehm, with shows performed at Upper Perkiomen High School. Harold was Harold. He chose plays no audiences wanted to see, as Bob says. But we plunged into Gilbert and Sullivan, The Mikado with Sandy, yummy as Yum Yum, Patience, spoofing the days of Oscar Wilde, and Sandy playing a cello that Anya Longwell dragged around on stage, and Anya was about 12, and HMS Pinafore, which Harold insisted we build both the bow and the stem on stage facing the audience, creating literally a U-boat on stage. Oh my. Sandy was brilliant as the villain, or rejected love in each of these. Her poor little buttercup and fluttering eyelashes brought down the house. Then there was the obscure 1904 musical, Leave It to Jane, by Jerome Kern, Guy Bolton, and P.G. Woodhouse, for all of you theater history buffs. Off our company went to a college campus, cheering on our football players amidst loves lost and found. Sandy, once again, brought down the house with the song Cleopatra, as she mooned over the star football player played by Brian Marks. Here are some of the lyrics. Imagine, I'd be like Cleopatra if I could have my way. Each man she met, she went and kissed, and she'd dozens on her waiting list. I wish I had lived there beside the pyramid, for a girl today don't get the scope that Cleopatra did. As always, she did the programs, the playbills, and I joined her designing costumes that her mother made for her, my mother made for me, and Ruth Longwell handled for everyone else. For Leave It to Jane, she tried to teach me to tap dance in her classroom at Boyertown Elementary School. She broke her wrist, and I still can't tap dance. Blame the tile floor. We also did a wonderful but lengthy production of The School for Scandal with the core company of players Harold had assembled, Sally DeFuscio, Mark Marconi, John Hallman, Brian Marks, and many others. A restoration comedy, it was long on talk. Harold also added a recorder group. Some cast members had been playing with him for a while, and others joined the recorder group for the show. We played for the scene changes back in a corner. And I remember Sandy one day in full restoration regalia, wig, feathers, reaching around, sighing and fidgeting, and I finally said, "Are you okay?" She said, "No, I'm not. I'm hot with pin sticking everywhere, and this danged corset, I feel like a fussy baby." We had something like 5 or 6 performances for which only my grandmother sat through every show. The cast gave Grandmom a plaque. But I noticed that the scene changes, with my mother in charge of props and furniture, kept getting longer, not shorter, as they should. So one night, I asked my mother, "What gives?" And she said, "Harold told us to keep changing the scene until the recorder stopped playing." And I said, "Well, he told us to keep playing until the set was changed." That was a Harold show. Sandy and others went on to form Janus Productions, and after I moved away. College and grad school kept me from seeing many of their productions, though Blithe Spirit was ferociously funny, and I got to do a version of storybook theater with them. Sandy also turned in a powerful performance in Gaslight. They did good work. She also worked with Mark Dry at Alpha Omega Productions and with Limelight Players in Reading. She was terrific as Miss Tweed, crime-solving artist in Something's Afoot, 2 times, as well as The Secret Garden, and maybe her most favorite of all roles and productions, Mrs. Lovett in Sweeney Todd. There is a recording of it somewhere in one of Sandy's safe places. Maybe it's hiding with a puppet. I also had the joy of directing her in Murder on the Nile for the DeSales Summer Theater before it morphed into the Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival. She shared many of her artifacts from sojourns to Egypt, and ever Sandy became the mentor and confidant of many of the young college-aged cast members. Since I became the teacher, producer, and director of North Penn High School Theater 18 years ago, she has been the fairy godmother for our program, with costumes, lobby showcases, props, donating our new psych, and some incredible sets, some pieces of which you can see scattered around. Some of her creativity you can see on display today. Her most favorite production was Elton John and Tim Rice's Aida, the High School Musical, for which she designed and mostly painted the set. You may have sat in the museum reproduction Egyptian chair at her dining room table on Rife Snyder Road. It appeared again in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. We were hoping to have a video of Aida playing today, but technical difficulties. She also did art and props for She Stoops to Conquer and each of our Shakespeare productions. When we took on Shakespeare with high school students, she admonished me, please save us from bad high school Shakespeare. I walk into my classroom now, and it is a museum of Sandy stuff. It's a comfort now. It feels like a Sandy hug. But before all this happened, in 1974, Bob and Sandy returned to Dutch country for the effective gamma rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds by Paul Stendhal. Bob directing, excuse me. Sandy is the leading role of Beatrice, mother to 2 daughters, Ruth, played by me, and Tilly, played by my good friend and ever my sister, Sue Levengood Carey, who unfortunately was supposed to be with us today and could not be because of that plague called COVID. So Sue's watching live. Hello, we miss you. I can still smell DCP on a hot summer night with crickets chirping. I can see us working our way through the story. Peter the rabbit and Sandy Bob's beloved pet hopping nearby. It's a tough show about a dysfunctional family, but Bob, Sandy, Sue, and I bonded. We became their daughters, their little sisters. Acting with Sue and Sandy, with Bob, pipe in mouth, speaking quietly from the audience, was magic. Sue was in Bob's 9th grade English class and went on to act in plays and be his assistant director at Boyertown High School. While time and life kept Sue and I separate for years at a time, we continued to connect through Sandy, and in the last years had some cherished visits with Bob and Sandy together. That's how Sue and I think of them, Bob and Sandy. Sandy accomplished so much, far and wide, gathering in riches of travel and teaching and friends. We all know what a force she is. But Sue and I know in our hearts there would not have been a Sandy in full bloom if there hadn't been a Bob, quietly making her visions into reality. He created a stand-up shower for her in the Spider in the Shower song in Storybook Theater, among so many other set pieces and props. He fed the cats and deer and birds and bird while she traveled far and yon. He loaded her van with Crayola workshop stuff and props and costumes for North Penn. He guided her to see Frozen this spring at my school. Not at all his type of show. Always there, always supporting, always steady. Sandy told me a bit ago that Bob told her he would take care of her in her elder years. What a promise he kept in steadfast love and support for her these past years, past months, the final weeks and days. Julie and Michelle and Sue and I were witnesses through some of that difficult time, where Sandy told us about it, and it meant so much to her. Bob, Sandy may have been the light on center stage, but you were the technical director, the stage manager, the director and producer, and the constant love of her life. From deep within our hearts and souls, we thank you for taking care of her and sharing her with the world and all of us. Thank you for being here today.
Good afternoon. I'm Lee Moyer. I humbly and proudly stand here today representing thousands of students who had Sandy as an art teacher. Every year she had more than 100 new faces, and in her 40 years, just multiply that and you get a number like I do. But in addition to that, I'm also representing today hundreds of classroom teachers and others who professionally and non-professionally worked with Sandy. How many of you are here today who worked with Sandy in the schools? Thank you for being here. I also want to say I represent the student teachers who probably numbered 50 or more in the times that Sandy was their mentor, Are any of the student teachers here today? There's one up there, a couple up there. Thank you. Can you imagine the legacy that Sandy left with those 50 people who left her classroom and then scattered throughout Pennsylvania and probably anywhere in the United States to spread and teach what Sandy had shown them made effective teaching? What a wonderful legacy she left. I'm here today wearing this. You know, I thought about maybe I shouldn't wear something like this to a service like this, but then I figured if we can have a U.S. Senator sitting in the Senate chambers with a hoodie and so on, you know, what's wrong with me at this? Although I saw they stopped him on Friday. Anyway, the other good thing is it's good to be at the beginning of what you want to say at a celebration like this, because everybody says something that you're going to say, so you're continually auditing till the last person probably has red notes all over their paper. So I'm happy to be second. So there's some things that I want to say to you, some things that you may not know, but let me share some of those with you. Sandy was the art teacher in the schools that I served for 30 years. Isn't that great to have one person for 30 years who you can work together, you know how you think? And so Sandy and I didn't really get problems with her messy classroom and her piles of stuff. You know, it only took me a couple of years to realize that's the way it was. And the other thing I learned, it isn't necessarily the end product that matters. It's the process. And the process that she had with her children, her students, was amazing. I want to make a bold, but I believe an accurate statement, and that is this, that today we are celebrating a life of probably the best elementary art teacher in Pennsylvania. And that is backed up with the fact that in 2025, Sandy was recognized as the outstanding art person in Pennsylvania by the Art Educators of Pennsylvania. What an honor that is. So I can safely say whatever I'm saying to you about Sandy certainly is true. The other thing that I want to say to you, and I can accurately say this, is that I said something to Sandy which made the whole difference, and this was 62 years ago. Many of you don't realize, but Sandy started her career in a town in York by the name of Red Lion. Red Lion is south of York, and it's between the villages of Windsor and Tallistown. Now you know where that is, don't you? Oh, the other thing I want to say to you is, you know, this is a celebration of life. So put away the tears and put the smile on your face, because today is a happy occasion. We are celebrating a life. So don't be afraid to laugh. So, you know, there are many things that in my 89 years I just don't remember anymore. But one that I vividly recall is back in 1960. I was a new principal in the Boyertown schools, and I had 4 schools, and I needed an art teacher. And somehow an application came through from a woman who was an art teacher, a second-year art teacher from Red Lion. And in those days, teachers were really hard to find. As a matter of fact, kiddingly, they sometimes say that the application from Boyertown started, the first question was, are you breathing and are you alive? So anyway, we went out there, and I can vividly recall going into the school and the classroom that Sandy was teaching. And it didn't take me long to say, wow, here's someone special. We'll never get her to Boyertown. But we went through the whole thing, and afterward we met. And here's what I had to offer to Sandy. 4 schools, 2 7s, a 4, and a 13. No art room, no supplies. 2 of the schools had stairs, so you had to go up and down the stairs for 4 of the classrooms. This was in Boyertown. The other thing I could say to them is that you taught art with the cart. Art cart or cart art, I'm not sure which it was. Because when the art teacher went to teach a class, and she had 33 of those that I offered her, 33 classes a week, she had to have everything in her art class that she needed when she walked in that door. Because if she didn't, she was in trouble. So it was an art class, cart class. But somewhere in that whole thing, I must have said to her, look, Boyertown has a great learning environment and a great history for teachers. And I think in there I also said, you know, music has so taken over Boyertown. This is back in the early 60s, the late 50s. I said, look, we really need to do something about art, so we're looking for creative, resourceful, motivated art teachers to come in. And I figured with all of that, she probably was going to say no. But when I said to her, would you consider accepting a position in Boyertown if it was offered to you? She said yes. And that's why you're here today, folks. Otherwise, it could be in Red Lion that they're celebrating today, right? But I need to say this, that even if Sandy had said no to Boyertown, somewhere there would be a school district that would have been recognizing her today for being the outstanding teacher that she was. She was a great teacher in all ways. So for her first 8 years, she was in my 4 schools, and the Lincoln and Washington schools in town were old schools, and so it was decided that they needed a new school, and they needed a larger school than Boyertown, the borough itself needed. But back in the 50s and the 60s, when you build an elementary school, the architects had it all figured out. You know, they had the plan exactly. You know, if you wanted 11 classrooms, it was 11 boxes put together and a room for places kids to eat. Well, for some reason, probably because of the newness of the whole situation, we hired an architect who had never built an elementary school. And we were free to involve the staff. As a matter of fact, we had 54 professional and staff members on a committee to build this school and design it. And you can imagine what I'm going to say about art. Sandy was chairman of the committee, and she surrounded herself with art people. It was almost like letting the rooster alive in the hen house. So as a consequence of that, we had this large entrance lobbyway. Do today. If you walk in there, you'll see it. And the first room, classroom that you see, the main room, is the art room. It's right there when you get in there. It is the largest room. It has a huge closet to go with it. And also the whole school, instead of having the plastered walls and so on, every classroom had a big 20-foot floor-to-ceiling vinyl tack board. So as much as that faces a problem, it certainly was a blessing for people with art, who had art to display. Anyway, the school was set up really to be art-centered, had a large showcase right when you walk in the entrance, which it still does, and it was all set to flourish, and it did under Sandy's leadership. Some of the highlights we certainly should talk about. If you look at it from students' point of view, students were really creative under her leadership. There was always wanted to go. You never had kids who didn't want to go to art class. They did. It was kind of a highlight. So for them, it was just a great experience. As a matter of fact, one of the teachers said, a first grade teacher said, Sandy walked in with her cart, and the kids started saying, Santa Claus, we're going to do a Santa Claus today. And it was early November. And Sandy couldn't figure out why. And she said, one of the kids said, because you have red paper in your art class. You know what? Sandy changed her whole plan, and they made Santa Clauses that day. Another one that she says, which talks more about her other innate skills, and that is we're dealing with children. She had some money missing in her classroom after a class, or she found it at the end of the class, and she suspected, she was pretty sure that she knew who had taken the money. So she asked a group of students, including this person, to stay after class and help to find it, and that person found it. She never said anything, but certainly the student knew how it affected them in their future. I talked about the student teachers. It was a great experience for us as well because every semester we got some newness into the whole school through them. The classroom teachers, at first, they just welcomed the fact that they had a break, a free period. But I think sooner they started to realize that what was happening in art class really helped them in the classroom because Sandy was willing to tie what they were doing in the classroom with what was happening in the art room. And so it was a surplus for them. And as some would say, Bob Trainer, for example, who was sitting here, says this: it was organized mess. You know, it didn't matter what you needed from the art room. Sandy, among all those piles that she would have, she'd go right there and pick it out and do that. They'd have many other things to do and say, I'm sure they could fill the afternoon with things they experienced with Sandy. Finally, I do want to say this to you. There's one other group of people that I need to talk about, and that is the custodians. Right from the very beginning, the custodians who were accustomed to neat classrooms, the chairs all put up on the table and so on, you know, they would open the door to Sandy's room and they would want to run. So it didn't go very long before there was an agreement reached between Sandy and the custodians that unless she turned on the lights, they weren't entered the room. So I don't know, maybe it was only twice a year that a custodian ever got into the room, but it didn't really matter anyway. But that was a group that I thought would require distinction. I also want to say a few words about Ollie the Frog. This T-shirt is 45 years old. It was one of Sandy's creative ideas, and that started right after Ollie. And it was Wilford was the moose that went with that, and of course many others who went this. If you haven't ever had the opportunity of seeing the life of Ollie on TV, you really need to see that. You know, just pick it up. It's in there. There's a number of other videos with Sandy that you can pick up. Her Days at the Lincoln Washington School is another one. So take that as an opportunity to learn more about Sandy. Her art shows. Every spring there was an art show in every elementary school, but the one at Boyertown was spectacular through Sandy. It was a highlight for the students, for the teachers, for the parents, the grandparents, and everyone else. And what it did is it had at least a half a dozen pieces of work that children had done throughout the year displayed in the classroom, because where else was there? The problem was where to store those. But somehow Sandy was able to store those thousands of pieces of children's artwork and get all of those out there in some way for all of those art shows, the spectacular ones. Finally, I want to say formally this, and I should have said this to Sandy before this, but publicly I want to say this. I want to say to her, thank you for your 22 years ago of accepting the invitation to come to Boyertown, and also for being my friend for all those years. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Julie Havanek. What can I say about Sandy that hasn't already been said? Thank you. My mentor, my colleague, travel companion, confidant. I could go on and on. Most of all, my dear friend. I know I miss her. I miss her smile, her infectious laugh. You all know about that. Her banter, her zest for life, and her advice. I lived vicariously through her travel stories, so they will be missed greatly. But she told them in such incredible detail, it was like I was there. Through Sandy, I've traveled the world. I've been everywhere, from the Great Wall of China to the Egyptian pyramids. I treasured the countless times we roomed together, yeah, we were trouble, at PAEA and NAEA conferences, that's Pennsylvania Art Education Association, National Art Education Association conferences. I could share several fantastic and hilarious stories because we had so many wonderful times together. In addition, of course, in addition to learning and growing and developing professionally as educators. We saw Sunset Boulevard, starring Glenn Close on Broadway. It was absolutely incredible. We explored the Space Needle in Seattle. We had a total blast. Things happened, let's just say that. We took a music-filled steamboat cruise in New Orleans. That was her absolute favorite. She told me so herself just a month or so ago. And so much more. I will, however, treasure our late-night chats, some about art education, but most about life, and I'll treasure those the most. When I think about her time as an art teacher, as you've heard, I am astounded at her dedication and her resilience. So many years in Boyertown, hosting, now I found out, 50 student teachers from Kutztown, and after retiring, deciding to continue to pass on her legacy by supervising student art teachers with me when she joined the art education department at KU in 2001. How fortunate I was that she made that choice. Little did I know then that the influence she would have on me and the difference she would make in my life. I've known my dear, charismatic friend Sandy for 22 years. How lucky am I? How lucky are all of we? She will forever be a part of who I am personally and professionally, just as I know she is for all of her students, her colleagues, her friends, and her family. That's a whole lot of people. I am sure each of you here today you have similar stories of Sandy's kindness, her generosity, her boundless energy. Today is a time to remember those stories, share them, celebrate her life and the legacy she leaves behind. Her spirit certainly lives on in each and every one of us here today. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. It's a lovely day. I think she commanded the sunshine today. My name is Michelle. Sandy and I became friends when I started doing her hair. We quickly hit it off. We had so much in common. It didn't matter the age difference. She called me her sister. She was more like a mom to me. Through Sandy, I've met some pretty amazing people. Susan's not here. Bob coined us Sandy's girls, but we're also Bob's girls. All kind and loving, just like her, we can agree that she has left an unforgettable impression. She was not only beautiful inside and out, she never had an unkind word to say about anyone. She commanded your attention and then helped you see life through her creative eyes. Her joy and smile contagious. Sandy, you forever live in my heart, and you are loved and never forgotten.
Afternoon, my name is Tom Schatz. Sandy the teacher. Eldon Catter and I were teaching a course in methodology for elementary majors in the teaching of art. We wanted to show our students exemplary practitioners. We asked our colleagues who were supervisors of student teaching whom we should videotape. Sandy Wood was mentioned most often. We packed up the heavy, cumbersome videotaping equipment of that era and drove to Boyertown. Entering Sandy's classroom was gasp-inducing. She had created a magical realm for her students. We taped a Sandy motivation demonstrating her gift for storytelling with a dramatic flair. After all, she was a thespian. She captivated the children with the tale of 3 billy goats who had to cross a bridge under which a great ugly troll lived. Upon the story's end, the children excitedly took crayons to paper to illustrate what they had just heard. What wonderful results Sandy had elicited. Driving back to Kutztown, Eldon and I marveled at what we had just witnessed. Our impression was validated as Sandy was given local, state, and national awards for excellence in teaching. Sandy the Traveler. I was most fortunate to have Sandy join 18 of my 28 years of leading art in Europe tours. Being a night owl, she struggled to be ready for our morning departures. But once awake, she shared insightful observations and wickedly amusing comments. Scandalously, this married woman always traveled with a single male companion, Ollie the Frog. This stuffed fabric amphibian eagerly posed for Sandy in front of monuments and artworks, and often Ollie insisted that his fellow travelers join him for the photos. Not all of them eagerly complied. Ollie was a brilliant educational tool for teaching geography and art history to Sandy's elementary children. Once home, Sandy would assemble slideshows of Ollie's vacations, eagerly anticipated by her children. Sandy the hostess. Sandy told Bob she wanted this day to be a party. She loved giving parties, themed costume gatherings, which is why I have this on, which I did wear to one of her parties. She planned elaborately decorated table settings, appropriately themed menus, and after-dinner entertainments. Sandy always accomplished her goals with fine flair. I'd like to go back to the traveling now. I would like to return to Sandy as traveler because I want to bring up a tradition that arose on my tours, wherein on the bus, as we neared the airport to return home, we sang a song we would soon be scattering for different flights. That song was one sung at the end of the Roy Rogers show in the 50s, which some of you may remember. Yes, Happy Trails. Our shortened version is only for 4 lines long. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you and keep smiling until then. The melody is simple, you will catch on quickly. So here's to you, our beloved Sandra Lee. Would you please join me in singing Happy Trails? Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you stay for a while longer and share some more stories with all of us and between us, like maybe get up out of the tables a little bit and move around, and share some stories of Sandy. We also are going to have some hot hors d'oeuvres coming out, and one of Sandy's favorite things of all times, cheesecake. So please share. We made them easy. Yeah, they're bite-sized, but lots of different toppings. Yeah. Okay, so please stay and join us for that, and thank you again for all being here.